I'm in Windows today. Oh boy.
No!
I'd appreciate it if you wouldn't use that kind of language.
Well, you see, I'm trying to dog food Cloud 9, and Linux is just too nice. So if I'm in Windows, I'll actually use Cloud 9.
This episode is sponsored by Component One, makers of Widgmo. If you need stunning UI elements or awesome graphs and charts, then go to widgmo.com and check them out. Hosting and bandwidth provided by the Blue Box Group. Check them out at bluebox.net. Hey everybody, and welcome to episode 25 of the JavaScript Jabber Show. This week on our panel we have Jameson Dance.
Hi guys.
We also have Tim Caswell, who is muted.
There I am.
AJ O'Neill.
Coming at you live from the ethosphere of Orem, Utah.
Yeah, we can hear a little bit of interference in the ethosphere. We also have Joe Eames. Sorry, I keep wanting to say James Edward Gray. This is the wrong podcast for that.
Howdy, coming at you live from the Mars rover.
Oh, there we go. You gonna tweet from Mars?
There's a 16-minute delay, FYI.
Oh, is that all?
You're really good at guessing where the pauses are going to be.
Right.
Yeah. All right, I'm Charles Max Wood from devchat.tv, and this week we have a special guest, and that is James Burke.
Howdy, coming live from Vancouver, BC.
Awesome. I love Vancouver. I've been there a few times. Do you want to introduce yourself really quick for the folks that don't know who you are?
Sure, I'm James Burke. I work at Mozilla in the Labs group, and I mostly focus on open source web app-related tooling. I originally joined Mozilla as part of the Mozilla messaging group, and I was doing an experiment around web-based messaging systems. And then before that, I worked at AOL and was a core Dojo contributor.
Awesome. So when you look at Require.js, it actually says the Dojo Foundation. Can you explain what that is?
Yeah, so it's similar to the Apache Foundation. It's just a legal entity that's set up to hold code mostly, and then to deal with some of the legal stuff around managing code. And so I really like it versus something like Apache, where if you were to be an official Apache project, there's a lot of stuff involved with that. Whereas the Dojo one is fairly lightweight. The individual projects decide how they want to run. It's just that you should get CLAs for larger code contributions, and then you use the foundation as the copyright, whoever gives code contributions gives the license to the foundation to use them. So it's mostly just for legal stuff.
Nice. And what is a CLA?
Contributor license agreement. So if you've had to deal with any of these larger open source foundations, they normally ask that you sign a thing saying, yes, I am contributing this stuff. It's my own work. I'm not taking it from someone else. And I'm giving you permission to use it. So it's mostly to satisfy lawyers.
Yeah, I think I remember when I talked to a lot of people at the Apache Foundation. In fact, I'm actually wearing my ApacheCon shirt from last year. They had CLAs for, I think, both the developers and for the corporations they worked for, so that the corporation wouldn't try and claim the code as copyrighted under their umbrella.
Yeah, and Dojo has a similar thing too.
Right.
You said it's to satisfy lawyers, but I don't think lawyers are ever satisfied.
That's true. I think this is just
they hunger for blood.
Yeah, it's something they think, it hasn't really been tested, I don't think, so it could change if somebody ever tried to test it.
Yeah, it's kind of like having garlic for vampires. It's not a guarantee, but it works most of the time.
Right.
Or if it doesn't work, you don't hear about it.
Oh, I'm sure somebody would hear about it. Anyway, so we're here to talk about Require.js. Now, I keep hearing the terms AMD and Require.js, and sometimes it almost sounds like AMD is a library. Is there an AMD library, or is Require.js just an implementation of AMD as kind of a concept?
Yeah, it's an implementation of AMD, which is short for an asynchronous module definition, which is a really bad name, but that's what the original proposal had on it, and it just sort of stuck. I would have preferred a different name, but that's how it goes. Naming is hard. But so AMD, there's an AMD implement group that discusses the the API specification, and then there's a wiki with the specification, and there's a set of compliance unit tests that you can run to test your loader. And so then Require.js is an implementation of that API.
Are they related to the CommonJS guys at all?
Yeah, a lot of it came out of talking with the CommonJS folks. It grew out of some of our experience in Dojo, where we had an XHR plus eval-based loader, and there's enough sort of rough edges with that we felt like it would be nice to have this sort of wrapped format, which is what AMD is. And so in trying to investigate how best to go about that, I tried, because Dojo had an X domain loader that was basically that sort of wrapped format that we would compile not compile, but just convert the code, the regular Dojo module code into that format. And so the idea was, well, if we could just use that format directly, then there's less translation layers, there's less discontinuities when you want to push code to CDNs. And then there's some environments that don't allow eval. The Chrome extension system, I think, is going to that model where by default they won't allow eval. But so, but at that time, then the CommonJS group had started up, and they were working through their module system. They already had something going when I started to interact with them, and Chris Zipe, also from Dojo, would talk on the group list. And so then we were trying to apply what we learned from Dojo, and then we picked up the CommonJS concepts as far as like relative modules, the idea of a require to get a module export. There's a lot of some of those mechanics that we tried to match up on there. I think where we disagreed was the CommonJS folks felt that it was not right to author in this sort of wrapped format. They preferred to do builds and just treat the browser delivery as a transport, which from our experience was not optimal. One of the things for Dojo is that you shouldn't need a compile step to develop web code. And I think that should be the ideal for any standards group that's trying to make the web better in the browser. One of my sadnesses, I guess, with CSS is that to really make larger CSS, a lot of people are going to basically compilers like the SAS or LESS or one of those systems, just because CSS has lagged so far behind. But ideally, they should be gearing towards like, hey, it's so easy to make in the browser. You just write some text files, then you load it in the browser, and it works. And so that was one of our requirements in Dojo land. And so when we couldn't quite get agreement on that, we decided to take the pieces of the CommonJS stuff that were really neat, the relative references to modules being one of the bigger ones, and then just apply that system to something that we thought would work better in the browser.
I just have to say I really love that idea. I think it's a great idea to just be able to hit refresh and see your code changes. It seems like such a small thing to have, I don't know, to go type some command to recompile your code, but it wears on you if you have to do it every time you make a change. So I think that's a great thing.
Yeah, you see that in other server-side languages too, where when you start up your web server, it loads the whole program into memory, and so there's not a compile step, but you still have to restart the web server in order to load the code changes into memory. And it's the same deal. It's so much more convenient just to hit refresh and get the changes there. To some extent, you can get around it with file watchers. You can do that on server-side languages too. But I know like Browserify has a file watcher thing, and some of the other compiled like module system things do. But it's a good thing overall. Yeah, and I think and for me those are always like stopgap measures, and I think it also it increases the barrier. Like once you go to that level, you have to. There's assumptions now on, for example, maybe what kind of server system that you use, and so somebody coming into JavaScript. I think to reach a broader audience that doesn't, the fewer sort of tool dependencies you have, the easier it is to get adopted. Right. So what are the advantages of using an AMD system like Require over just requiring the JavaScript libraries that you want?
You mean just putting them in script tags?
Yeah.
Like in the HTML?
Yeah, exactly.
Oh man. So you have to like order your dependencies correctly in your HTML, which is weird. And you have to put everything in global scope to do that, which is also weird and bad. And it's really hard to deal with. It discourages making your code modular, I guess. You end up with lots of like monolithic, huge, gigantic global objects because if there's a high barrier of entry to just adding another file, then you're not going to do it. You're just going to stick crap in the same file. Does that make sense?
Yeah, agreed.
Yeah,
So I guess I
think
talked about the disadvantages of not doing it, and someone should probably talk about the advantages of doing it.
Well, one of the biggest frustrations can be my files aren't in the right order, and finding them in the right order, finding the right order for them can just be a huge pain in the butt.
Yeah, it turns you into a human dependency manager, and that's something computers should do, like for you. And that's what Require.js does.
So does anybody have any good reasons why it's more advantageous to not do it? Because I can't think of any.
What do you mean?
To not have a module definition.
I think the only advantage is just like straight up least number of steps to get something working at all. So maybe if you're teaching someone how to program or trying to do like the basic minimal example, but for actual production use, I wouldn't want to do JavaScript without some kind of module system for the browser.
And you also have to realize JavaScript is a community of amateurs, just like PHP is. And so, like, this new era of actually designing code rather than just throwing things on the floor is a different paradigm. So a lot of existing code is difficult to work with when you start doing modules because it screws things up. So it's like that refactor versus hack and fix kind of thing. So for a new app, it's great, but if you've got something existing, maybe it'll do weird stuff.
Yeah, that's true. And there's also the fact that there's just a lot of friction in JavaScript when you're trying to put this in. How many libraries are out there that just don't support Require.js? Might fill in the blank here with your favorite library.
So Require.js does have some plugins, and James should probably be the one to talk about this more, but there are plugins to wrap libraries that just explodes global objects and make them into AMD modules. So you can take just like regular old JavaScript files that stick stuff on window, and I believe it'll turn those into just exported modules, won't it?
The shim config that's in the Require.js 2.0, it will load. It won't do any sort of wrapping itself. It'll just be sure to load those legacy scripts in the order that you say. So what you end up doing is you specify the dependencies and the exports in the Require.js config. And so then it'll load it, and then it'll grab that global and then use that as the sort of module export.
So it kind of makes it look like they're modules even if they are global, so you don't have to worry about ordering issues. Is that what happens?
Correct. Yep. And so the only downside with that approach is that, the globals still exist, but for most apps that's fine. And then when you do sort of an optimization step, you don't have the flexibility of, say, loading some of those. If you have a shimmed library that depends on, say, underscore, for that to work in the system, you need to build an underscore into your combined file. But I think those are both, for most projects, those are perfectly fine limitations, since it allows you to use the libraries that you prefer.
Is there a better way to use libraries that aren't like AMD modules, or is that the best way to just use the shim thing?
Ideally, you just wrap it in a define and then you do an export. But then you're modifying library code, and that makes people uncomfortable, and understandably so. So, ideally, hopefully, like there's these UMD patterns, universal module definition patterns, where you can get it so that if you're a library author, then you can code up your code so it can act as a module or just do browser globals. So I think that's a nice resource. If library developers would go to that system, that would make it easier too.
So how do you find out about the universal module definition? Or
It's on GitHub. There's umd.js/umd, and there's a set of sort of code templates for that.
It's kind of just some boilerplate where you check basically for the existence of different loaders, and if you don't find any of them, you just stick it on the global. Pretty much, right?
Right. Well, you detect for different module APIs. So the common ones would be Node or CommonJS style, AMD style, or browser globals.
Yeah,
so
it looks like the last committer on that is J.R. Burke.
Yeah.
Dun, dun, dun.
You know a little bit about this, huh?
Yeah. Well, I think Adi Osmani, I think he started the group, but since I have experience doing these things, I ended up doing most of the templates, though.
Right, that makes sense. So, do you ever find that, or do you, I don't know, is there a major push out there for people to start writing their libraries in this way? Are there advantages to the library authors to do it this way?
Yeah, well, I think it's it definitely makes it easier for people that now, for like MVC systems in particular, it makes a lot of sense. Like once you've gone to that first step of saying, you know what, I'm going to partition my code to models, views, controllers, that just naturally lends itself to be different files, different modules. And once you start doing that, then you realize, oh gosh, if I only had a module system, this would be so much easier. I could be able to read the code better. And I think as developers get into that, you know what, we do need to take some of these patterns, break this code apart. I think most library authors would see the value of having a module system. And so I think the only trick then is, what do you think is worth supporting? And so I think one thing to realize is that the ECMAScript is looking at a module support natively in the language for Harmony. It's not done yet, but the basic mechanics of it, as far as I have this dependency, I'm going to reference it with a string. It's going to give me an export value, and then I'm going to use that locally, and I'm not going to depend on globals. That's the model going forward. So I think AMD fits into that nicely. It works today, and it has the least number of gotchas, across the development lifecycle. So, but of course, I'm biased.
Right. So does Require.js, if you author a library in a module, does it namespace it for you, or does it just load it into the global space anyway?
So it keeps the module in a space, and Require.js actually has this multi-version sort of context support, so you can create different vats or buckets of modules. And so, but technically, if you go on the Require.js object and you look in the .s.contexts, you'll be able to find that thing. But that's only because but that's sort of internal data in a system where I could properly hide things like in an ES5 environment. That stuff wouldn't have to be globally accessible, and most code doesn't access that directly. So I think the idea is by using strings for the modules, and by making sure that your module doesn't name itself, it allows you to load multiple versions of the same thing in the same module space, or in Require.js case, you can also create a different context. So. Like for unit tests, this has been useful. You can have a separate sort of bucket that mocks one or two dependencies and then run some tests. And as long as you're not modifying global state, like the document or changing the DOM, all that code is self-contained.
Right. So how widely used is Require.js? Do you really have a good handle on that, or?
Yeah, it's hard. Like for me, I think it's important to if I focus on the right things and provide the right support, and not worry so much about tracking, then things work out. So But I know like there's bigger projects. Like I think once you get to a sort of webmail class system, you're going to want a module format thing. And I think IDEs, so like Adobe Brackets and then Cloud9, they both use Require.js on the front end. And then so Dojo itself. So as far as like AMD modules in general, like if you're a library author, it's like, hey, should I worry about doing AMD or opting into calling the module API? Dojo has its own AMD loader. There's some other ones. LinkedIn has one. And then there's Curl.js. There's even one LS.js, if I remember right. They can store files in local storage. So I think you get a lot more options. Even if somebody wasn't going to use Require.js itself, I think AMD in general, it does feel like it's growing. And if I gauge it by the number of sort of support questions that I get, I'm getting more sort of newbie questions like that are basic JavaScript questions. And so to me, that's an indication that it's really starting to seep into that sort of mainstream, day-to-day developer thing.
Right. So one other thing I've been looking at Require.js, you have like a project directory right on the web page. It shows it, and then in there a scripts folder. A lot of times people have some kind of build process on their system. So basically, all of their scripts are going to be compiled and minified into one file. So if that's the case, when you try and require something, is there a way to work around that?
I don't think I quite followed that.
So let's say that I have like jQuery and jQuery UI and a bunch of other things that I need on my web page. And, I just want to compile it all into one big file that has all of the libraries included in it. Can I still use Require.js if all of that stuff is required?
Yes, there's the Require.js optimizer, which is r.js. And its goal is, so what it can do, it actually runs Require.js either in Node or in Rhino. And then there's been a request to have it run in Windows script host, which should be easy to do. I just have to create some adapter modules. But what it does is it'll trace your dependency tree, find all the dependencies, combine them into one file, run it through a minifier. It has native has.js support. So if you have like has blocks in it, it'll convert those so that when you do the optimization, those disappear.
What's has.js?
It's something started by Pete Higgins, and it's similar to a modernizer. It's just that it's a JavaScript API for running feature or capability tests. And so, so it's just a way for you to select different code paths.
So it will actually optimize out parts of your code that aren't available in the browser that you're going to be running on it?
Well,
what do you mean it has JS support?
So you can tell the optimizer, build this set of scripts, but for this has test, like has array extras, say that that's true. And so then if you in your code, if you have like if not has array extras, do this work, what will happen after that's minimized is that if block will be
okay, so you can kind of assume an environment in your build step.
Right.
Okay, that's cool. I didn't know that.
I like that idea as well.
And so then I guess then the other stage of that then is, okay, great, I've optimized all my code into one JS file. Well, do I need to deliver Require.js, which is a dynamic loader, which is, it does more things because it allows you to load code from the network. I don't need that anymore. And so there's Almond, which is on GitHub, jrburke/almond. It's just an AMD API shim, which is a lot smaller. It's like 1 kilobyte gzip to minify. And that just provides the basic define Require API so that you can put that into your build script. And so now you don't need to ship Require.js with your code either.
Nice.
So go ahead, Tim.
Sorry. So, as you guys know, I've been working on back-end Node stuff for the last few years, but recently I've been importing a lot of my libraries to the browser. And one thing that's really spoiled me in Node is I can declare my dependencies in a JSON file and then give someone my code, and they can just npm install and get their dependencies. And I've been looking for something like that in the browser, and recently I found Jam.js, which does that, and then uses Require.js to load all the modules. And so that's what got me using Require.js. And it kind of breaks some of your rules, because the Jam.js system is a central repository, and there's only one jQuery there. There's only one whatever. It's kind of hard to like drop in Zepto instead. I mean, have you seen a lot of increase in use because of this, or have you not really heard much about it?
Yeah, so it does seem like Jam.js is getting some traction, which is neat, because it uses Require, so that's awesome. But I also I've worked on a thing called Volo, and I think it's at Volo.js/Volo on GitHub. And so the idea behind that is it uses GitHub as the package repository, and uses the version tags that are stored in GitHub for the Git repo to find the zip file for that version, and you can install it. But what it also then allows you to do then is, if you say, okay, in my package.json, if you have a Volo dependency section, you could say, for jQuery in this case, I used Zepto. And so if the project that consumes that, if it doesn't already have a jQuery installed, it'll go and use Zepto in there. And then with the Require.js, either by putting in a Require.js config to say, hey, when somebody asks for jQuery, load Zepto, or if you were to just rename Zepto to jQuery, then you have some options to sort of swap in a different provider for that sort of API that you assume by the dependency name.
So you basically just declare in some aliases.
Right. Yes.
That's cool. I mean, the main thing I want is I just want to be able to declare my dependencies and not include them in my repo. And I really like the Simver versioning that Node has, but I mean, GitHub tags isn't that far off either. You just don't get all the magic from Simver.
Well, I think you could still apply that Simver stuff to a GitHub repo. Like, I don't support that now just because I'm lazy. And a lot of times, front-end projects are a lot shallower and simpler than maybe a Node project. Because like in a front-end project, you can't do the same thing as Node, where it has this sort of nested Node modules installation for things that may conflict. And it's a great way to avoid conflicts, but you got a sort of a very big file tree on disk, and for the browser that doesn't make sense. But so anyway, but I think you could apply the same Simver stuff to a GitHub repo thing. It's just that you want to say it's greater than or equal, to these version numbers. People properly version their if their repos, which they should be. I think that can still be worked out.
Okay, so someone just needs to add that logic to the client that pulls from GitHub.
Right.
So would there be a way to write some kind of wrapper that would let you use Require.js with NPM? Because my biggest problem with Jam, I think, is just that it's not NPM. Like it's another package manager, and it's another different place to put JavaScript code. And there's tons of JavaScript code already in NPM, and lots of it would work in the browser. Some of it is just like utility code that doesn't touch file system APIs or something. So it seems like it'd be awesome if you could use Require.js, but also have the ability to do dependency resolution and all the nice stuff that NPM gives you.
Yeah, so I think for me, it's actually good that they're not the same, because NPM assumes some things that are not true in browser space. So in particular, NPM is not good at saying, hey, I just have this one JS file dependency, and I want to install that. It wants to do these directories and have it doesn't feel natural to me as a front-end developer to have this nested, this directory spray on disk, whereas I would just put everything in sort of like a scripts folder or a lib folder. And then I think there's also the assumption that the code in there works for Node. I think one of the Ender folks mentioned one of the difficulties they had was that sort of assumption, trying to piggyback into NPM, it comes with some sort of node assumptions already. So
I mean, obviously, you wouldn't be able to use like the file system tools without doing tons of shimming and crazy stuff. But I'm just talking about as more of a code repository, because there is code that doesn't. I mean, it was written for Node, but it's just like a utility to parse date timestamps or something, just like random little things that are already there. So you're talking about the nested directory structures being bad, because, I mean, why would that be a bad thing to have a nested directory structure like that?
So I think it's good to go to sort of a convention-based thing. This grows more out of my experience with Require.js. It has a very nice convention where you say, hey, if it has a base rule, and then you say ask for jQuery, then it just looks up for jQuery.js inside of a base rule. But once you have so the browser, you only get one I/O lookup per dependency, and so I think it's best then if you also have a convention that doesn't require sort of a configuration line for each dependency that you install, because now you have this giant config block, which to me is a little bit more brittle, and you're delivering a lot of code that doesn't need to be there if you just follow. I mean, you're delivering a code block that doesn't need to go to the client if you just follow a convention. And so what I would like to see, like if there's a couple things with NPM. There's the registry, and then there's the tool that downloads the code from that registry. So maybe one option would be you can use that registry, but when it downloads, it knows, hey, I'm not going to just put this into a jQuery folder under like node modules or something, but I'm going to put it in a scripts folder and call it jQuery.js. So that sort of natural ID to path resolution just works out. That might be an option, but so I think that's the thing for me where I think Node was right to say, okay, you know what, we're going to work out a system that just works for Node. We're not going to consider browser concerns. And so they've worked out a great system for them. I think conversely, as folks on the browser side, we should make sure that we work out a system that works best for us and delivers the code in a sort of layout that we would expect. And then, hey, if there's a way to match those things up later, great. But I wouldn't want to start with first try to kludge NPM into generating a browser-based project.
Right. I mean, I recently been porting a lot of my Node libraries to the browser. And the problem I had initially is you have different dependencies depending on which environment you're in. For example, there is jQuery in NPM that runs in Node, and it depends on JS DOM or something that provides a DOM. In the browser, you have the DOM. Whereas some of my libraries might depend on Node's event emitter, which you don't declare that dependency in your Node package, but if you're in the browser, you need something that provides that interface. So you have very different dependencies depending on where you're running. You can't really reuse the same package. So
one of the pities there is that I don't think there's a general desire in the community to standardize on a way to do that. So I've got Pack Manager, and in that I have a key in package.json called browser dependencies. So if you list something in browser dependencies, you can list it there. You can also give it an alias. So you can have like events.node and events.browser and alias both of them as events when you want to put them in. But I've contacted a few of the other people that do some of the things like I think it was Ender and one of the ones that Jameson had mentioned before. And there wasn't they didn't really want to standardize on some sort of key or some sort of system of doing that.
Yeah, because I think it's still, for me, I think this is the same thing with module systems too. It's better to code up something that works well in the environment you're targeting, and then if two other environments find something that works together, where they can commonize, then I think it makes sense. But I think at this point, Node is fairly settled in its ways, probably NPM too, where their main focus is just making sure that they can provide a great server infrastructure. And so anything that makes where they would have to do code changes for the browser, I think they're just less likely to do because their heart really isn't in it either. So, and that's totally fine because they've built some great server stuff. But yeah, I can see where it would be hard to find agreement.
Yep. So, what's kind of the future of Require.js? I mean, have you put all the features in that you want, and you're just going to have it be the lean mean tool that it is, or do you have other features that you want to put in?
No, it's mostly a refinement. There's a loader plugin support, so it's great for transpilers, but I think there's still some rough edges in there when you start to get really complicated with the transpiler stuff. So, like there's a CoffeeScript plugin, loader plugin, so that you can load CoffeeScript in an AMD system. But I think the circular dependency support in that pathway is not as strong as it could be, and so I've got an idea on how to get that working. And then I also want to use this, and I think hopefully it's already been true, as a sort of a proving ground to try out some of the ECMAScript stuff. So that I have this other loader plugin. It's Require.js under JR Burke on GitHub, where you can code in sort of the existing ECMAScript module spec, and it'll convert that into a JavaScript that runs in today's browsers, loaded via Require.js. And so I'm hoping then to use that sort of thing to help inform their process, because I think there are still some things to be worked out for that. So yeah, what I'm hoping in the future is that it's just about stability, refining how it executes, and then hopefully informing something that'll get into this into the standard. Because at some point it would be nice for me not to have to do Require.js or AMD stuff.
Right. So one other question I have, since it's an open source technology, what's the best way for people to get involved? I mean, do they need a CLA and then they're good, or is there more to it than that? No, like the CLA is really needed for sort of non-trivial patches. So I take a lot of like 1 or 2 line patches, because if it's just like, oh yeah, I was being dumb and forgot to do something, or doc patches also are great. So, and then there's also just helping out on the Require.js mailing list. That's always appreciated, because seems to be getting a lot more popular, and so just the list traffic is pretty steady now. So, so the more people that can help out with that means I have more time to actually work on core issues. And so, so getting involved, I would say check out the Require.js list, help out on questions. You can do pull requests. Simple ones they don't require a CLA. If you want to, refactor the plugin system, then that would require a CLA. But yeah. Awesome. And then the other question I have is, since you're no longer working at AOL under the Dojo project, does that really affect the amount of time and things that you have to put into Require.js?
Yeah, I think one of the drivers for me for for stepping away from working on Dojo was Require itself seemed to be it was getting enough steam, and it needed enough of my attention that I really couldn't do the other stuff. And so, very fortunately, Roald Gill in the Dojo community, he stepped up and he's converted their loader over to AMD, and he's done a lot of the sort of the base loader and build system work that I would have probably done. And so, I think it's just more about Require.js and AMD stuff taking a lot more time, and but it's great to see that the Dojo folks have been able to handle it themselves.
Right.
I have a specific. Oh, go ahead.
I was just going to say I have a question for people that are just getting started out, want to get into Require.js. Do you have a recommendation on where they should go, what the best resources are for learning and implementing Require.js in your projects?
Yeah, well, there's a getting started page on the requirejs.org site. But I feel like I need to rework that probably a little bit. It's probably a little old. But I think that's a great place to start. There's also now, depending on your, choice of other tools, like Tim Branyan from Boku, he's got a Backbone boilerplate that uses Require.js. So if you're a Backbone person, that's probably a nice way to hop into it. But yeah, other than that, hopefully the requirejs.org site is a good way to start. And then there's the Require.js list if you have questions.
Awesome.
I have a question. I was doing some templating stuff. It wasn't with Require.js, but I remembered that Require.js has a text plugin to load just text as a JavaScript module. And I looked at it, and have you ever like found something in the back of your fridge and been like, oh, this looks pretty good. And then you pull off the lid and like Cthulhu like pops out, like these spores of like mold and fungus just like overwhelm you. Like I'm looking at the text plugin and it does like Java IO stuff in the browser. Like, why do you need to do that? I obviously don't understand all the complexities of, I mean, this is used in production all the time, so it definitely works. And there are probably all kinds of crazy edge cases. Why do you use Java to load text?
So that text plugin, so how the Require.js optimizer works for loader plugins is it actually runs the loader plugin in the build environment. So, because otherwise it wouldn't be able to sort of resolve the plugin resource ID.
Sure.
And so for that to work, since the optimizer runs in Rhino and in Node, it has code paths for those. So there's a couple of options if you didn't like that. You can always just write your own text plugin, and when running in runtime, you load that one. While you're running the build, you point to this sort of single file one that does all of it. And then it's also common once you do the build, if you don't need to do any dynamic loading with a plugin, you don't need to include it. So you can do an exclude in the RJS optimizer, and then you can do a stub module for the text thing. So it just writes out a single line thing saying, yeah, there's a text module, but it doesn't need to do anything. So
that makes sense. So it's running in Rhino, so it builds this Java string to get run in Rhino.
Right,
okay.
And I think so why is that all in one file? It's most people just like to deal with one file. Like it's hard to say, So I think that's that sort of trade-off.
I think I phrased my question poorly. I wasn't trying to say, oh, this is horrible code as much as like, is this really how you have to write?
Oh yeah, Java
for Require.js. Like, do you need to write some Java code in there, or?
No. That one is because it's doing I/O access. So in Rhino, the way you get access to the I/O systems is just through Java, and Java is horrible for just wanting to say, I want to load some text. So I'm sure if you look at the Node pathway, it's a lot simpler. That's just the cost of Java.
Do lots of people use the optimizer on Rhino? I mean, do all the community plugins work? Is it pretty much the standard for them to work with Rhino and with Node, or do people just kind of pick Node because it's easier if you know it?
Well, I would just recommend Node because just the build itself runs so much faster. But there are definitely people who they just can't take on Node as a dependency, particularly in intranet environments where they already have Java things built up. And that's one of the things that's been interesting for me is getting these, once you work on if you worry about just the client stuff and not assume certain build tools or build environments, there's these vast JavaScript communities that are not, in Node. And like the Visual Studio crowd, like they have NuGet, which is a package manager, and they deliver some JavaScript code through there. They have their whole other ecosystem, and same with the Java folks. So I think it's just which sort of subculture you see getting used. But I definitely get regular pings on running in Rhino, because one of the issues I just had that was fixed in 2.0.5 was that the closure compiler use optimizer seemed to have failed, but it was just how you construct the class path. Anyway, so it's used. I would say though most people, and I would encourage most people to use the Node one just because it'll be faster. And I think if you're a JavaScript person, being able to spin up small server things that are JavaScript based. I hope I said JavaScript before, not Java, but Node is a great thing, and it just runs a lot. The optimizer runs a lot quicker in Node.
You've heard it first here. Node is faster than the JVM. Quoting you.
Whoa.
Oh no.
Is there anything that isn't faster than the JVM?
Oh no, the JVM is fast.
Well, they keep optimizing it. It's just
JVM is super fast.
It seems like whenever I look at Java code, it's 90,000% bloat and 2% what you need to do.
Well, that's Java code. That's not the JVM.
I guess it can't clean up after.
Well, and I think for my use case in particular, since I'm using Rhino, there's this extra translation layer going on. I'm sure that's part of the cost. But yeah, Node is so much faster, at least for my use case.
Yep.
Well, especially for command line tools, with Rhino, you have to start up a JVM every time you launch your CLI app, and that's not fast.
Right. Agreed.
So, I have one quick question, and I mentioned this on Twitter a few weeks ago. One of the first things I noticed when I started using Require.js is it's 80 kilobytes of code, and I mean, granted, that's the bulk of that can be minified out, but is there a place in the world for a smaller AMD loader that like only supports maybe one AMD format and just the mainstream browsers? I mean, how much of that 15K of minified code is used in the 90% case?
Yeah, so...
Did you just ask if Require.js is bloatware?
No, I did not. I asked how much of it is handling the edge cases, because I'm pretty sure all of it's needed for some edge case.
Right.
Yeah, and so there's a couple things. So there's IE, which is always a challenge, and
unfortunately with edge case.
Yeah, unfortunately it's a pretty large percentage of browser use still, but it's with IE10. I think now it's good enough where I can strip some things out with that, but I try to make sure that it runs even in IE6. Although so the deal is supporting IE6 through IE9, it's the equivalent. As soon as I can cut IE9, then that's what would eliminate some of that code. I have a little bit of extra code because I support the multi-version context stuff, and then I think but a good portion of it is it's just hard to make a network loaded linker. So you have these dependencies you got to fetch, you got to wait for them to load, you want to then wait for those dependencies to load, and then tracing that back correctly. But that said, I'm open for pull requests. I guess the other maybe part of that is I maybe support some config options that other loaders may not need. But yeah, so I think that's the strength of the AMD ecosystem. If you don't like Require.js in particular, you're welcome to use another one. I would suggest starting with Curl.js if you didn't think that Require.js was quite the size that you wanted. But it's so I guess one sort of gauge on the complexity cost would be so for me I always measure minified gzip, because then the gzip sort of works out to the amount of entropy, stuff that's different in the file. So minified gzips, Require.js is probably close to 6K, whereas Almond is 1K. So what's the difference between those two? Almond doesn't do dynamic loading, so that's one of the bigger hits. If you don't have to do dynamic loading, or if you can do synchronous loading, you can reduce the size of the loader quite a bit. But Almond, so I think that's where the bulk of the implementation cost comes from. And I think for me, it's also been about, so once you get to that level of, so 1K versus 6K minified gzip, if you're using, the reason that you're going to want to use Require is that, well, for two things. You think modular code is the way to go, and you want to get into that pattern now. And the other thing is, once you have a module loader, it's much easier to make larger programs, load code on demand as user clicks a button. And once you look at that aggregate cost of all that code that you're loading, the loader does not factor in, to the overall cost. I mean, that's not going to be the bottleneck on performance.
Right. I mean, my issue is not the file size at all. Just take 100 pixels off your JPEG header, and there you go. I mean, what's 10K on a web page? My main concern is just the complexity of the mental complexity. I noticed on the website that you support like 12 different signatures for defining a module between the permutations of require and define and require.js and all the various options. And do you want to promote a certain format, or does each one have its own strengths?
So I think for the define format, so it's really nice for configuration to just be able to say define object literal. Those signatures are about making it easier so that the user typing cost is not what they're focusing on. So there's the object literal form of define, and there's the I just got 2 or 3 dependencies I want to load. So passing the array of dependencies and then a function that the factory function that gets called with that array. That's pretty sweet, and it matches to what a lot of web libraries do today. Because you'll see a lot that have the immediately invoked function, and that has they pass in jQuery and some other things. But once you go past maybe 3 or 4 dependencies, you want to align the dependency name with a local variable name. And so I think that's where the simplified common JS wrapper, where you just say define function require, and then inside there you can say var a equals require a string. That meets the need of those developers, because there are definitely people that want that alignment, and I appreciate that alignment when you have more than 4 dependencies. And you can say, no module should have more than 4 dependencies, but there are going to be top level modules that tie everything, a bunch of things together, and those are naturally going to need to access more than 4. So I think it's all about meeting the developer convenience, and hopefully informing then any eventual module standard things. And I think the other sort of complication then too is when you do the simplified common JS format, where it's just define function require, in order for the loader to find the dependencies, it converts that function to a string and then parses out the require calls. But once you minify the code, that gets hard to do, and so you need to sort of compile down to just here's the dependency array, here's the function, and then you don't have to depend on the function toString stuff after build, because there's also the possibility that someday a JavaScript engine doesn't need to require isn't obligated to give you back a sort of source the source version of a function toString. Like it could just return compiled code or something like that, the string compiled code. So in those situations, we wouldn't be able to scan for dependencies. So it's also sort of a hedge against that. So I think that's where those come from.
All right, cool. Well, we need to start wrapping up. I did email you and tell you about picks, right, James?
Yes, I've listened to the show, and I'm aware of the of that.
Okay, because I've sprung that as a surprise on a few people, and I know that we probably have a few more questions. What we'll do is we'll do the picks, we'll wrap the show up, and then if you guys still have questions you want to ask James and he has time, then we will we'll just kind of we'll keep recording and we'll put it up as bonus content. Does that work for everybody?
Sure. Yeah, if it works for James.
Yeah, it works for me.
All right, cool. Well, Tim, why don't you start us off with the picks?
All right. So for the longest time, every time someone asks me what testing library to use in Node, I say just use Node as a search. But I recently finally gave in and used Mocha by TJ. And it's kind of a balance between the Englishy BDD stuff and still sanely usable. It's a fairly simple test runner. And I don't know, I like it, it's fun. And you can use whatever test assertion library you want. You can use Node as a search, or you can go crazy and use something that's based on should, and you write big English sentences in JavaScript. And the one neat thing I discovered last night is you can combine it with JS coverage and get test coverage support in your code. So Mocha and JS coverage are cool for unit tests.
Awesome. Jameson, what are your picks?
All right. My first one is that lots of you have probably already seen it all around the internet, but the Steve Jag posts, I think it's called the Magic Bus or something like that. Notes from the Mystery Machine Bus, where he talks about how there's a software spectrum from conservative to liberal as far as what style of programming language and what style of software development you like. And it's a Steve Young post, so it's super long. I think he's a good writer, so I think it's interesting. There's lots of stuff that I agree with and lots of stuff I disagree with, but it's a great read. And it made me think about some of the choices that I make as far as language and the way I design programs. That was great. There's another article, I think I read this a few weeks ago, but I just came across it again. It was actually a Ruby talk by one of the core Ruby developers who's from Japan, and it's all about garbage collection, but at a really high level. It delves a little bit into some basic C code and some basic Ruby code, but I think it'd be pretty readable, even if you're not super familiar with those languages. And especially at the beginning, it's just all metaphors that explain garbage collection really well. It's also kind of cute because it has these like Japanese cultural metaphors that he sticks in that the translator kind of makes notes about. So that was a good read. And my last one is, weird, I didn't plan this, but it's a Japanese movie called Howl's Moving Castle. It's a cartoon. I feel like I've watched all the famous like family entertainment that is in English. And so I was just looking on IMDb and I found this movie that was rated super highly. And I had dismissed it before out of prejudice because I am a doofus, but I sat down and watched it with my wife and it's so good. Oh, it's amazing. Christian Bale is one of the voice actors and he does his Batman voice. It's pretty great.
Awesome. All right, AJ, what are your picks?
So just spinning off of Jameson for a second, I think the name of the guy that makes the movie is Miyazaki, and he's got a whole bunch of movies.
I watched a couple of his other ones, and they're all pretty good.
Yeah, they're all extremely weird, but good.
Yeah, Spirited Away, Ponyo. I'm trying to think. Kiki's Delivery Service.
It's so cool how, it's not the normal Western arc of like normal intro and then the conflict builds up in the middle and then it ends with resolving the conflict. Like it's a lot different style of plot and things happen that seem really weird that they just kind of ignore all the time. Like, I don't know, it's very, you can tell it's from a very different culture, but it's great entertainment.
Yep.
So anyway, a couple things I'll mention. I set up a 120-inch projector screen in my new living room. I switched apartments. So I've watched a few movies on it, and it's pretty awesome. So I'm going to have to give a big plus to projector movie nights as a pick. Also, in aiding that, I would like to mention Make MKV, Handbrake, and Requiem. Make MKV, I think you only need if you're using Windows or if you're trying to do a Blu-ray, but it does the decryption on DVDs and Blu-rays so that you can copy it to your hard drive. And then Handbrake on Mac allows you to, and I think on Linux as well, allows you just to straight convert from your DVD drive to a file that you can use on your Android phone or your iPhone. Whereas on Windows, I think you have to use MKV first. And it was a simple enough process that my sister figured it out. And then Requiem is a program that's for your legally purchased content on iTunes. Makes it so that you can use that content on any device of your choice. You have to be logged in with the account that the stuff was purchased with, so you can't pirate with it. Which I think is good because I don't think people should be pirating, but I do think that people should be exercising their rights and that we shouldn't let the media companies stick it to us.
Right. Okay, cool. James, what are your picks?
Oh, we got the mute there. So I think for web stuff, there's Xtag, which is done by Daniel Buckner at Mozilla. And it's really neat. It ties into the web component stuff, being able to create your own tags that sort of bootstrap into code, JavaScript code. So I think just that whole area of web components is neat, and the object.observe stuff on the ES discuss list is also in that vein. Then there's the Firefox OS, or BTG. What I really like about that is I'm hoping that sets the stage for Apple and Google to just build in those same sort of device capabilities directly into the browser and that sort of install of web apps themselves. Hopefully that's the model going forward for mobile devices and then desktop devices. So it'd be great to see that. And then the last movie I just saw last night was GR Dreams of Sushi. And that was, it was just really neat. Philosophical thing too. So that's it for me.
Nice. Joe, what are your picks?
All right, so my first pick is the book series The Lost Fleet by Jack Campbell, which is a really awesome sci-fi war series of books, and I don't know, there's like 10 books in there or something like that. It's way cool. My second pick is a card game, kind of a card game. It's called Spot It. Super awesome, fun, family-friendly game. Yeah, really awesome. Played it a ton yesterday. We probably played 15 games over the course of half an hour with 10 different people, different groups, and really just had a blast. And then my last pick is Let's Code JavaScript, test-driven JavaScript by James Shore, which I think I picked before, but I just really feel like I want to pick it again. It's James Shore basically just streaming himself, writing an app from scratch using JavaScript, using test-driven development, and it's really super awesome.
Nice. All right, well, I guess it's my turn. In the pre-show, I mentioned that my car kind of blew up again. And so I'm just going to pick some of the things that make life easier when you're working on your car. In this case, the water pump on the new engine that we put in the car seized up. And when the pulleys don't turn, the belt doesn't turn, and eventually the belt will just come off. And that's what happened. And then it's not driving things like your air conditioning or your power steering or your alternator. And so you don't get very far. And since the water pump isn't turning anymore, it's not cooling your engine, which bad things happen, and it can overheat your engine. And so I lucked out because it finally gave up right before I got home, so I could pull into the garage right as it was telling me it was overheating. Anyway, if you're going to work on cars like that, a good set of wrenches is handy, but what you really want is an air compressor and an impact wrench. And if you have the air compressor and the air-powered impact wrench, then a good set of sockets is all you really need to get most of the work done. And beyond those, a good hydraulic jack and some jack stands will get you the rest of the way. So anyway, I'm just going to throw those out. One other pick that I want to put out there, and it was something that Joe reminded me of when he mentioned Spot It. Another fun matching kind of game is Set. And it's the same kind of thing. You're looking for different shapes and colors and patterns, and so they can all be the same or they can all be different in the shape, the color, and the pattern. And anyway, so you're trying to match 3 cards, and then when you pick up the cards, then whoever's dealing will put more cards down, and whoever gets the most cards wins. And it's a pretty fun game. So anyway, we'll get the links to all that in the show notes. And just want to thank James again for coming on the show. It was a great discussion.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
I think Require.js is really pushing the web forward, which is awesome.
Yeah, I'm gonna have to give it another serious look here. But anyway, we'll wrap this